Hello YouTube! Mead, let's learn about it.
When I think of mead, I think of that sweet golden colored drink that is often associated with the Vikings. But that is by far not the only type of mead out there.
When I think of mead, I don't think of Vikings, I just think of countryside stuff. Perhaps.
Like in medieval France, people would risk third-degree burns to create a dark, almost black mead known as Bochet. So thank you to Factor for sponsoring this video as I make the black mead of 14th century France, this time on Tasting History.
That is so cool! I love this channel so much, man!
So I've made mead here on the channel before, way back in 2020, shortly
Maybe I should
after
make
I began.
mead.
But it was a 13th century mead that was rather simple. Delicious, but simple. But mead is often not simple. It can become very complex with different flavors added from herbs and spices and different flowers. And then there is a mead called Bochet. And it gets its flavor and color from caramelizing or even burning honey. The recipe comes from Le Ménagier de Paris, which was a guidebook written by an older gentleman in Paris in 1393 with the aim of teaching his young wife how to run a household. And there's one section of the book that is filled with different remedies for when somebody gets sick. And that's actually where this recipe is found, in Beverages for the Sick. The recipe begins: to make 6 sextiers of Bochet, take 6 pints of very sweet honey and put it in a cauldron on the fire and boil it. And stir for so long that it starts to grow, and you see that it also boils and bubbles like small blisters which will burst, releasing a little bit of dark smoke.
I've never boiled honey. I've never boiled honey. It's one of those things where I'm like, why haven't I? But it never crossed my mind that you could.
Then add 7 sextiers of water and boil so much that it reduces to 6 sextiers and keep stirring. And then put it in a vat to cool until it is lukewarm. Then strain it through a cloth and put it in a barrel and add a pint of yeast from ale, because that is what makes it piquant. Though if you use bread yeast, it makes as good a flavor, but the color will be duller. And cover well and warmly so it ferments. So that is his basic recipe for what he calls Bochet, though there are numerous spellings of that word that you can find in other medieval manuscripts, but that's how he spells it. Though unfortunately, since he wrote this in 1393, he does use an archaic form of measurement known as a sextier, sometimes a septier. Even though sex and sept mean two different things, they both are the same thing in this case. And that word also has lots and lots of other spellings throughout the centuries. And not only spellings, but different quantities. The amount that a sextier is varies wildly from century to century, and even from location to location. Luckily, the other unit of measurement, the
You know what this reminds me of? It actually reminds me of a pinch. When you say a pinch of something, every time you look at it, you're like, huh.
Pint is a little more consistent throughout history. So we are able to kind of guess exactly what he's talking about, especially because we do know a bit more about what this quantity would have been in Paris at the time. It's not perfect, but the ratios should end up being about right, and since I'm cutting this way down anyway, the ratio is all that matters, because this recipe makes a vat of Bochet. I don't have a vat, so I'm making a much smaller amount. So
be shocked and surprised if he did have a vat. Technically, my parents do have one. Making a vat of something?
For this recipe, I am using 1 pint of honey, 1 gallon plus 2 cups of distilled water, and 5 grams of dried ale yeast. You can also add a few grams of yeast nutrient if you want. It's not absolutely necessary, but it does kind of help speed up the process. Ideally, what you're actually using is ale barm. But unless you've been brewing some medieval ale, you're not going to have any of that. Unfortunately, I have not been brewing any medieval ale, though I do want to do that once I have a kitchen again. This is actually the last recipe that I made in my kitchen before they tore everything out. It's kind of being redone. So I haven't been cooking as of late, and I've really been relying on meals from today's sponsor, Factor. I often make HelloFresh meals in my kitchen, but without a kitchen, can't really do that because it does involve cooking. But Factor doesn't involve any cooking because Factor delivers chef-crafted, ready-to-eat meals to your door, and they only take a couple minutes to prepare. Yeah, because they're fresh and never frozen, the
Okay.
flavor is all there. They're really, really good meals. And while they're perfect if you have no kitchen, they're more perfect for if you just have no time. If, you don't have time to prepare an entire meal, you can just heat up a Factor meal and not have to rely on takeout. And they have 35 weekly options with meals for everyone,
if it's
whether you're
cheaper than takeout,
vegetarian
why
or
not,
vegan, keto, or just like delicious food. So head over to factor75.com or just click the link in the description and use my code TASTINGHISTORY50 to get 50% off of your first order plus 20% off of your next month of orders. That's TASTINGHISTORY50 at factor75.com for 50% off of your first order plus 20% off of your next month of orders. Now to start with our mead, we're going to begin with the honey. Actually, we're going to begin with the pot.
What kind of honey? Because there are so many types.
Use a pot that is so much bigger than you think that you need. Also, I recommend wearing gloves and long...
Use a pot that's bigger than you think you're gonna need is such a sound advice, honestly, when it comes to cooking in pots. I found that it's actually very useful for soups as well.
Sleeves at the very least while you're making this, because the burning honey does sputter a lot, and when you get it on your skin, you're gonna have a bad time. And before you add the honey to the pot,
especially if you have
hair
on your hand, I guess,
and use either a ruler or at least a spoon to measure how high that water comes up, because that's the amount of liquid that we want at the very end of the process after everything reduces. So you can tell how much you need in there after everything reduces. So add the honey to a very large pot and then set it over medium heat and let it slowly warm up. After just a minute or two, it'll go from thick and viscous to a more liquidy consistency. Then after a couple more minutes, you'll start to see bubbles around the edge of the pot. And once that happens, you want to start slowly stirring.
I can't believe I never thought about boiling
keep stirring
honey.
Pretty much the whole time for the next 15 minutes or so.
I want to make this recipe now.
So save your strength. Another minute in and the honey will start to create a foam across the top. And once the foam covers the top, that is when things can quickly get out of hand. So just...
Wait, it looks like cappuccino, man. Am I crazy? Here, it kind of looks a bit like cappuccino.
Just keep an eye on the temperature and make sure that the honey doesn't foam up too much, but the honey will foam up some, and you want to keep it bubbling. So to keep the foam down, just keep stirring and making sure to scrape the sides so nothing burns. At about 6 minutes in, you should start to see the honey begin to darken, and large bubbles will start coming to the surface. Now, in many modern forms of Bochet, this is actually where you stop. It's just starting to caramelize, and now you'll have a lovely, light, caramelly flavored Bochet. But the 14th century recipe is pretty specific in how far it wants us to take this, so we're gonna keep going ahead.
Basically reduce it a bunch.
Keep boiling, and eventually the honey will start to steam and even let off a little smoke. But if you keep stirring, it will not be burned, just toasty. As you approach 10 to 12 minutes, the foam on top becomes thick and large bubbles will swell and burst, letting off dark steam. This is what you're looking for. This is what the recipe calls for. It says that they're like blisters bursting, which is gross to use in a recipe, but that's what they call it. And this is also where the recipe gets really quite dangerous.
You see, this is the part where I'm glad I have aphantasia. Blisters bursting. I'm like, no, I can't imagine it. I can't see it, so it doesn't mean much to me.
So again, long sleeves, gloves, be careful, and do not look over the pot. Please, you will lose an eye. Because you are about to add the water, and the boiling honey will sputter and shoot up, and hot steam will fill the whole area. When I did this, there ended up being honey kind of just all over the wall and everything.
Good thing he was renovating, right?
And luckily, they came in the next day to redo the kitchen, so I didn't even have to clean it. So continue to...
I need to redo my kitchen, but I'm not looking forward to that. Yeah, don't burn your eyes.
Slowly add the water, and the sputtering will eventually subside, and the honey will actually harden, and that's okay. Just leave it on the heat for a few minutes, and as it heats back up, the honey will dissolve again. You want to bring the Bochet up to a gentle boil and then start to let it reduce until it hits that gallon mark. That's why it's important to measure the gallon before you start this process. For me, it took about 40 or 45 minutes for it to reduce that much, but just keep an eye on it. Once it's reduced, take it off the heat and set it aside and let it cool down. preferably to just like slightly warm, but no more than 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Then pour it into a vessel for fermenting, and you want to strain it through a sieve, or you can get a funnel like mine that has a sieve built into it. And as it continues...
Damn, I need one of those. I need a funnel with a sieve on it. Damn, I don't think I needed it, but I'm like, wait a second. Wait a second, that would be amazing.
Cool, you can mix your yeast with just a few tablespoons of water to waken it up, and then add that to the Bochet. And again, make sure it is no hotter than 120 degrees Fahrenheit to be safe, because you could kill the yeast, and then all of your work was for naught. Now, technically, this is the end of kind of what you need to do. You just let it ferment. But there is a second optional part in the 14th century recipe that I am going to do. And that says, if you want to make it very good, add an ounce of ginger, long pepper, grains of paradise, and cloves in equal amounts.
What the heck is a grain of paradise? But oh my god, that sounds like Christmas mulled wine. The cloves and the pepper. Oh. What the heck is a grain of paradise,
for the cloves,
though?
Of which there should be the least. And put them in a cloth bag and toss it in.
Definitely shouldn't put too many cloves, because I have made that mistake. And let me just say, too much clove taste, I'm like not a fan of.
And when it has been 2 or 3 days and the Bochet smells of spices and is strong enough, take out the bag and wring it out and put it in the next barrel that you make. And so this powder will serve you well up to 3 or 4 times. And this is not uncommon to add spices. Most old mead recipes, whether it's Bochet or any other kind of mead, do add spices. So for this, you want 5 grams of ginger, 5 grams of long pepper, 5 grams grains of paradise, and 2 grams...
I'm learning words, man. Even looking at them.
...of ginger, 5 grams of long pepper, 5 grams...
Even looking at it, I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know what I'm looking at.
...grains of paradise, and 2 grams of cloves. And you really want...
Grains of paradise, let me Google it. Is a spice from West Africa. It resembles peppercorns and has a flavor profile with hints of cardamom, citrus, and ginger. It serves as a substitute for black pepper. I've never cooked with it. It was once widely used in Europe as a substitute for black pepper. It's native to West Africa. I guess it was once used is very accurate for the fact that it's not used. Interesting, I've learned of a new one. Now I want to get some and cook with it. I might need to go to the spice shop. There's like a place that has, I think, almost every single spice. I call it the spice shop. It's not really called that. But...
You want dried whole spices for this, nothing that is pre-ground. You want to give them just a slight grinding before we're going to use them. Also, if you don't have long pepper or grains of paradise, I suggest you get some. I'll put links in the description. They're wonderful. They were very popular in medieval Europe. And they're both types of pepper, but they're so much more complex than the black pepper that we have today. Long pepper came from India typically, and grains of paradise
long pepper I've had
from Africa. You can still get them online or at some specialty shops, and they're just fun. So I'm going to crush these up just slightly, but not into a fine powder, just enough to break them open, and then mix them all together and set them in a piece of finely woven cloth like muslin, and tie it into a sachet with a good length of string left for it to dangle. Now I'm adding one more ingredient which isn't technically mentioned in the recipe but would have been present, and that is wood chips. Now they wouldn't have had wood chips, they would have had wooden barrels. This was typically fermented in a wooden barrel, but I'm using a glass jar to ferment, so I'm not going to get any of that flavor from the wood. But many places today that...
The question is, would it really change its flavor if you only leave it for a couple of days?
Specialize in brewing or making wine do have
usually
wood chips
you
that
have
you can
them
add
for a lot longer,
to add that
right?
flavor. So I'm using some wood chips. So add those and the sachet of spices to the mead and then put on a lid with a bubble airlock on top. Again, they would not have had this.
What is a bubble airlock? I am learning things today.
In medieval Europe, they would have instead either just left it open or put some straw or cloth over it to keep the buggies out.
Yeah, you usually just put like a cloth and you tie it with a rubber thingy, just like your typical jar.
But it's not really
I'm learning
the
a
best
lot of
way
things from this video.
to do fermenting, not the safest way to do fermenting. So I do recommend the airlock, and then you just put a little water in there and it keeps everything out nice and safe, but it lets out the gases from the fermentation. You can't completely close this off or it will blow up. So you need the bubbler. Then you're going to set this in a dark place in the house
Interesting.
and let it sit for 2 to 3 days, then take out the sachet of spices and let it ferment for another month or so. You'll know that it starts fermenting when the bubbles start coming up to the top and you can actually hear them, and you'll know that it's done fermenting when you can't hear the bubbles anymore. So mine took about a month, which is plenty of time to make sure that you are subscribed to Tasting History, and for me to tell you a little bit more about the history of medieval mead.
Man, his segue into like the sponsorship and into telling you to subscribe, so freaking good. It's time for history!
So I was actually hesitant to do another video on mead because I kind of thought, well, I've covered it. I've trod this path. But 4 years after making that video, which really focused on mead in the Scandinavian and mythical world, I realized there is a lot more to talk about. So let us start with medieval Poland. Poland has a long history of beekeeping, so it's only natural that they also have a long history of mead making.
I did not know Poland had a history of beekeeping. Like, I know that they create a lot of things when it comes to alcohol. I don't know, they had honey.
All the way back in 996, a diplomat and traveler from Cordoba, Ibrahim ibn Yakub, visited the court of Poland's first historic ruler, Mieszko I, and he said that besides food, meat, and land for plowing, the country of Mieszko I abounds in mead, which is what the Slavic wines and intoxicating drinks are called. For centuries, mead was a centerpiece of Polish exports.
The more you learn.
The Poles and the Rus made exquisite mead that was prized above all others in the region. In his 1584 poem Roxalania, the Polish poet Sebastian Klonowicz praises the wines of Italy, but says that they can't hold a candle to the sweet and heavenly nectar that is mead. Earth proffers wine from the rich moisture of the dirt. Jove himself in heaven distills our mead. Bochet is the author of the vineyard, Jupiter of honey. For if wine is born of the earth, then mead is born of heaven.
Excuse me, sir, you have a very nice way with words.
None can deny it to be a dew celestial. There were several types of mead that were made in the region, and the most expensive, the most prized, was a mead made without adding any water at all. The only thing was honey, and then sometimes they would add the juice of cherries or different berries. And then they would seal it up, bury it, and let it ferment naturally for anywhere from 10 to 50 years. This type of mead was so precious that by the 15th century, Duke Janusz III of Mazovia restricted its consumption to the upper classes. Though because this mead was so expensive, it was usually only the upper classes who could even afford it. So restricting it to them kind of seems unnecessary.
The black market must have been thriving.
And mead in Eastern Europe at this time really does seem to be mostly associated with royalty specifically. Perhaps my favorite mead-loving royal was the 10th century Princess Olga of Kiev.
Damn, she looks... Can I just say that she looks really beautiful? This depiction is incredibly beautiful. Look at those eyes.
Later to become Saint Olga. Though her mead drinking takes place during one of her less saintly moments. See, her husband, Prince Igor, had just been murdered by the Drevlians, and she was upset. Olga was mad, and
makes sense to be upset, yeah.
So she sends a note to the Drevlians saying that they must prepare great quantities of mead in the city where you killed my husband, that I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast for him. It seems sweet, but let me tell ya, do not mess with Olga, because she shared this mead with the Drevlians, and when they got sufficiently drunk, she had them all massacred. And this was only following her burning a bunch of them alive in a bathhouse while she stood outside taunting them. They don't make saints like that anymore. Now, she wanted this mead so that she could drink it as she mourned the loss of her husband, Prince Igor.
I mean, valid crash on, but damn!
And that does seem fairly common in this period in Eastern Europe. In fact, in the 9th century, a traveler, Ibn Rusta, visited the land that is now Serbia, and he wrote that they too drank mead on the occasion of someone's death, and when a year has passed since the death, they take 20 jugs of mead, or more or less, and go with it to that hill. The family of the deceased gathers, they eat and drink there and then they go their separate ways.
Interesting, because we technically, like, in Romania, we still have this, or I guess it's like the Orthodox religion. We still have this where we gather and drink as a family for several years after someone's passing, and we still celebrate them with like food and drink. So it's interesting to see.
But mead wasn't only drunk during
Similar
times of sorrow, but also times of celebration for festivals and weddings and all sorts of
behavior
happy
in
events.
medieval times and
And
other
when you move
places.
further west, it was the same case, but sometimes they used it as a form of payment, like in Wales. In the Welsh law code, known as the Laws of Hywelda, codified in the 10th century, it specifies that some people are to be paid in silver, while for others, a mess of food and a hornful of mead he receives from the court for his provision. There are also guidelines for how much of several different drinks a steward is to receive after giving food and drink to the king. A steward has the length of his middle finger of the clear ale from off the lees, and the length of the middle joint of the braggot, and the length of the extreme joint of the mead.
Extreme
Braggot
joint?
or braggot was basically a combination of mead and ale, and while delicious, I'm sure, was not worth the same as just the mead. 2 vats of braggot or 4 of ale are paid for 1 of mead. The worth of a vat of mead which is paid to the king is 60 pence. 9 handbreadths is the measure of the vat of mead when measured diagonally, that is, from the furthest bottom groove to the hither rim. Kings around this period were enamored with mead because while in Wales they were using it as a form of payment, in England, if the king was to come over, you had to make sure to have an ample supply of mead on hand. In the life of St. Dunstan, by a cleric simply known as B, he tells the story of King Ethelstan of England, who is coming to stay with a relative, Ethelfleda, at the monastery at Glastonbury. He sends messengers ahead to make sure that she is well supplied for when the king arrives, because it's not just the king. You have to remember, when the king came to visit, it was an honor, but it was an onerous one.
An entourage as well, like a
traveled with
law.
hundreds or even thousands of people. And it was up to you to entertain and feed and supply them all. So it turns out that...
Can you imagine, like, just the ordeal of having the king visiting your place?
That she had plenty of everything except for mead. And the messengers were like, well, this is not gonna fly. So she starts freaking out, and she goes to pray to Mother Mary for intercession, for some help, and it turns out, once the king gets there, at the feast, they start pouring the mead, and as the mead drains, the pitchers refill themselves, so there was never any less than a hand's breadth of mead in the pitchers. Now, this royal love of mead does apply to this era, but also much later. It continues on through the medieval age, even into the Tudor age, because Queen Elizabeth I had a favorite mead. Her beekeeper, Charles Butler, wrote a treatise in 1609, several years after her death, called The Feminine Monarchy, or The Treatise Concerning Bees and the Due Ordering of Bees. And he says, one excellent receipt I will here recite, and it is of that which our renowned Queen Elizabeth, of happy memory, did so well like, that she would every year have a vessel of it. The recipe was 1 part honey to 6 parts water and was flavored with sweet briar leaves, thyme, rosemary, and bay leaves.
Briar leaves? Interesting combination for her mead and preference, like flavor-wise. Very fascinating to learn about the history of mead and how, like, the royals were enjoying it in those times.
Before being fermented. Then cloves and mace were added, and it was aged for 6 months.
Mace! The more I look at it, the more I'm thinking the mulled wine variants that we have, maybe they came from the fact that we couldn't have mead, so people just made wine and, like, other things.
Sadly, it was not long after this period that the popularity of mead began to wane. By the 18th century, in Poland and Russia, vodka, which was much cheaper and much easier to make and much stronger, had really usurped mead's place.
I have a confession to make. I knew Poland for their vodka. I didn't know them for their mead. That is all. The Polish vodka, though, if you ever get a chance to have it, it is absolutely amazing. And that's coming from someone that doesn't really drink alcohol. But when I went to Poland and stayed there for a bit, I was treated by the family that was basically accommodating me at the time. They gave me different types of vodka to drink, and you couldn't tell it was vodka, which was insane. It was the most delicious alcohol I've ever had because you really couldn't tell it was alcohol, even though it was vodka. So, yeah. I don't know what Polish people do, but damn.
And in England, there were several reasons that it kind of went out of fashion. One was the dissolution of the monasteries by Queen Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, because most of the beekeeping and hence mead making in England was done by monks. So with no monks, you had less honey and you had less mead. Another factor was the addition of adding hops to ale. This allowed the drink to have a longer shelf life while still being rather cheap, which made it more attractive to the average drinker. Now, mead didn't disappear entirely, it just became more of a niche drink. It was very popular amongst like countryside peasants who were making it for themselves because it was available. And to them, it was cheaper than wine, which had really become the more prestigious drink to have.
And it takes
Though
less
some
to make
people
time-wise,
also
right?
drank it for its medicinal properties. It was often thought to be curative, especially when infused with different herbs and spices, just as the Bochet is. And in fact, there is a 16th century French treatise that talks about the curative properties of Bochet, provided it is made properly. When the Bochet is underdone and the honey is not well cooked, it bites the belly hard and generates the diarrhea and makes great suffering.
Oh no!
But when it is well cooked and scented, it is delectable to the taste, and it smoothens the voice and clears the throat and the pipes of the lungs and comforts the heart and gives it jubilation.
The way they spoke back then about certain things, it's like... And it gives the diarrhea and it's bad. And then when it's beautiful, it's just like just writing fancy words down. Interesting to know that if you are cooking it and you're cooking it badly, it can actually have an adverse effect on you though.
They started adding all sorts of different herbs and spices to the Bochet and would sweeten it with sugar or raisins. But then they also sometimes would include
raisins,
less desirable ingredients, like shavings of ivory and hartshorn, each of 3 drams. And that's why I didn't make the 17th century recipe, but stuck with the medieval French recipe from the 14th century, which should be ready to drink. So after the mead has fully fermented, about a month, or when you stop hearing that bubbling, then you can go ahead and rack it. And basically that is just pouring it into another sterile container and keeping out the dead yeast. Then you can either let it age for a while, or you can drink it as is, which is what I'm going to do right now. And here we are, Bochet, the black mead of medieval France.
Look at that color.
It smells caramely. There is
It
like
looks
a hint
caramelly.
of burn, but not unpleasant. I'm not getting a lot of the spices from the scent, so I'm curious what it tastes like.
He's like, I need another one to like fully be able to tell.
That's really good. So it's not sweet at all.
At all?
It's like mead can be really sweet.
Okay.
This isn't sweet at all. The spices are just enough.
Okay.
It's also not as viscous as many meads, and that's because
it's very
it has
liquidy.
a lot more water than most meads that you have today. Some meads today can have like 1 part mead to 4 parts water, sometimes 3 parts water. This is 6 parts water, 1 part mead. So definitely not as thick, probably not as alcoholic, but that's not the point. It's supposed to be curative, and I don't know about that, but tastes good. So I am going to
I mean, you have cloves and ginger in it, right? Like that alone is not gonna harm you, I think.
let this sit and age, and maybe in a few months I'll give another crack at it, give it another taste, and see how it develops. It's actually a lot more complex than most meads that I've had, and it's really good. I was worried that it was going to kind of be bitter because the honey had there was that burnt honeyness to it, but it's mellow, it's softened, it's delicious, and yeah, it's great. So next week, fingers crossed, I'll be back in my kitchen.
It makes me want to try the recipe. This is not It's not good. Why did I watch it? No. Also, look, the next one is the mulled wine. We were just talking about that. The way he acted after he had it, it was like holding himself back from drinking it all, so he can actually tell you about it. Maybe I'll try it. Gift it to my parents because I think they would like it. At least I think my dad. All right, YouTube. Thanks for being here, thanks for watching, and let me know down in the comments if you made the recipe, if you tried it out, or if you're going to, or if you had mead, which is like what kind of infusion of spices did you have it with. As always, thanks for being here, and I shall see you next time. Bye!